Hi, welcome to the midweek message. There's no question that we live in strange times right now. We often are hearing them described as unprecedented times. And often people say we're navigating uncharted waters. There's no denying any of that. But as strange as these times might be, there is a sense in which they're no different than any other times. Solomon wrote in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, beginning in verse 9, "That which has been is that which will be, and that which has been done is that which will be done. So there is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one might say, 'See, it is new'? Already it has existed for ages which were before us." And famously, in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, he wrote, "There is an appointed time for everything, and there is a time for every event under heaven, a time to give birth and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to shun embracing, a time to search and a time to give up as lost, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear apart and a time to sew together, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace." These passages early in the book of Ecclesiastes emphasize the cyclical nature of life. That is, things come and things go. The same things happen over and over again. Someone lives their life and they die. Another generation arises to take their place, and eventually they are going to die, and another generation comes. The sun rises, the sun sets. The wind blows, and it returns. The rain falls to the earth, it evaporates from the seas, it condenses in the clouds, it rains again. Life is a cycle. And as much as things might change, and as strange as some things might seem to us, especially now, there is a sense in which what we are experiencing here today is really nothing new. It might be new to us, but it's not new in the grand scheme of things. And what that means is the things that have always been important are still important. Solomon set out, according to the book of Ecclesiastes, to find real meaning and substance in life. He was in a position to explore that more than any person who had ever come before him and more than any person since. He sought to explore education and wisdom in which he might find satisfaction and meaning. But in the end, he found it to be futility and striving after the wind. He sought fulfillment in material and earthly pleasures. He sought satisfaction in relationships with friends and lovers alike. He sought to satisfy himself with the palaces that he built, the gardens that he planted, and all of the great things that he did for the kingdom of Israel. But ultimately, Solomon found that all of those things were vanity and striving after the wind. Just like today, men seek to satisfy themselves in finding real substance and meaning in all kinds of different pursuits, in all kinds of different relationships. But ultimately, having explored all of those, Solomon realized that there was really only one thing that was truly meaningful. He wrote in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, beginning in verse 13, the conclusion, when all has been heard, when all of his experience had been weighed in the balances, when everything had been considered carefully, he concluded this: fear God and keep his commandments, because this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. As much as things might change, there is a sense in which nothing changes. Men are always going to seek meaning and significance to their lives, and they're going to seek for it in secular education, worldly wisdom, relationships with others, the amassing of material things, in an attempt to find something that truly endures and fills that void within them. Solomon made the same effort, and he concluded that there was nothing more important than this. There are three things I want to call your attention to in Solomon's conclusion. First, reverence and obedience are inseparable. It's impossible for us to truly fear God if we are not willing to do what He tells us we ought to do. We can call Him Lord. We can say that we revere Him. We can claim to fear Him. But if we don't act upon that reverence, if we don't act upon that fear to actually do what He says do, then our reverence is in vain. We can't claim to be godly people, to be followers of the Lord, if we're not actually following. Religion in name only is exactly that. It's only in name. Fearing and obedience are inseparable. Secondly, this is the whole duty of man. Regardless of what we might otherwise do or not do in our lives, regardless of what others may ultimately conclude about us by whatever standard they might judge, this is ultimately all that matters. Our relationships with other people and what they may think of us, the accumulation of secular education and worldly wisdom, the construction of houses, the accumulation of wealth, all of the grand acclamations with which we might surround ourselves mean absolutely nothing if we don't fundamentally get this most important part. Thirdly, it's most important because we are all going to stand before the Lord in judgment. The book of Hebrews tells us it is appointed for man once to die, and then comes judgment. Paul wrote in Romans chapter 14 that each will give an account of himself before God. In 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 10, we will all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that we may be recompensed for the deeds done in the body, whether they are good or evil. We're going to keep that appointment. There's a time in which all men, small and great, of all ages and of all nations, are going to stand before the King to give an account of our lives. And then the only standard that's going to matter is His. What's going to matter then is whether or not we have feared God and kept His commandments. There are a lot of things that change. There are things that we're experiencing now that from our perspectives may very well be unprecedented. We might be navigating uncharted waters. But there is a sense, a larger sense, in which we are navigating the same waters that God's creation has navigated since the beginning of time. And in that sense, this one thing has never changed. Are you fearing God, and are you keeping His commandments? Does your life reflect that single fundamental priority around which everything else is centered? Your morality, your personal conduct? What about your family? What about the way that you operate as a husband and wife, or parents and children? What about the church of which you are a part? Certainly it would claim to fear God, to be practicing religion, but is it keeping the commandments? Is it following the pattern of the New Testament? This is the one thing that matters. This has never changed, and it never will. Thanks for watching.